My first stop is to meet a local historian to find out about Hampstead's past and why it has remained so untouched from the developing city of London.
Welcome to the Old Bull and Bush. My name's Diane Burstein. I'm a qualified London Blue Badge tour guide, and I'm here to give you all the information you want to know about Hampstead.
What can you tell me about this pub?
Well, there's been a pub on this site since the 1720s, although we're actually in an early 20th century building at the moment, and we're very near to Hampstead Heath, which was a destination for Londoners, particularly in the early 1900s.
So they would have come here for a day out?
Exactly, because in 1860 you had a station open. It was Hampstead Heath Station, and it would bring people from East London. So it was very much an East Londoner's day out to go to the famous fair. The fair would happen on the 4 bank holidays. So the song really sums up coming along, having a good old sing-song at the Old Bull and Bush, having a Cockney knees up, really. And we still have the fair here today. People are still recommended, really, to come up to Hampstead if you want somewhere that's just 4 miles out of London, but with a village atmosphere. I mean, there are some areas which people will call a village, but they weren't actually villages when it comes to London. But Hampstead really was, because you're 4 to 4.5 miles from the centre of London, and people would come by horse and carriage, horse and cart. It really was a bit of a journey up here because it's one of the highest points. And once you got here, you were in a little village. In fact, the name Hampstead, it's from homestead, home farm. So there would have been a few farms there, a few dwellings, but it wasn't terribly busy. And when people used to look up at the hills of Hampstead, they would think it was snow-capped because there were laundry women who would do their washing up here. People would send the washing up to Hampstead because you had lots of water. Hampstead's history is very much tied up with water and fresh air. And back in the late 17th century, people discovered that there was chalybeate water on the heath, and this had very good healing properties, or so the doctors said. A doctor wrote a pamphlet all about it, and people came here to take the waters, and then they looked around and they thought, well, this is a nice place, I think I'll stay here. And developers started to build houses here.
What sort of people did it attract?
Well, in the early days you had the middle classes, but you did have your poorer people. And when you see some of the smaller cottagey type houses, that would have been where the working people lived. But you also had grand houses. You had wealthy merchants here. So, for example, Fenton House, which is now a museum, that was built for a merchant. And of course there was Kenwood House as well, which is very well known English heritage property, and that for many years was the home of Lord Mansfield, who was the Lord Chief Justice. But you also had a lot of artistic people coming here, writers and artists. The artists were attracted by the fantastic views.
I believe that the anti-Catholic Gordon Riots had an effect on Hampstead. What can you tell me about that?
Well, they certainly did, because living here in Hampstead, in Kenwood House, was Lord Mansfield, Lord Chief Justice. And he was rather a liberal judge. He's associated, for example, with the anti-slavery movement. Before the abolition of slavery, he made a judgment saying that while on English soil, no man is a slave. He was also in favour of Catholic emancipation. So when they were discussing in Parliament relaxing the laws that persecuted Catholics and didn't allow them to take high office, for example, or worship, he was one of the people who was in favour of relaxing the laws. So he became a target during the Gordon Riots. Now, the Gordon Riots are named after Lord George Gordon, and he was one of the main supporters of a group of Protestants who wanted to march on Parliament to protest against this relaxation of the laws. But things got out of hand and riots ensued. One of the things that the rioters did is let the prisoners out of of the prisons. Now, then you're asking for trouble, of course, because you've got people who are criminals who are on the streets of London. They burnt down prisons like the famous Clink on the south side of the river, and then they headed to Bloomsbury Square. In Bloomsbury Square was the townhouse of Lord Mansfield, and they succeeded in destroying that. And Mansfield and his wife Elizabeth, they managed to escape through the back door, and up they came to Hampstead, where they thought they would be safe. But the rioters weren't going to leave them alone. They were heading up to Hampstead. And there was Lord Mansfield's nephew, Lord Stormont, and he managed to divert them by encouraging the troops to come out, but also encouraging the rioters to stop and have a drink at the Spaniards Inn, another of our famous pubs here. It's there that the landlord apparently plied them with drink, and they then got very happy and decided, oh, maybe we won't destroy Lord Mansfield's country home.
Well, an excellent way to prevent a riot. Just get everybody drunk.
Give everybody drink.
Diane, when I'm sort of driving around Hampstead, I often see some curiosities, and one of the one that fascinates me is the Parish Lockup.
I believe that now it's used as a billiard room, but back in 1730, when the house was first built, we did not have a proper organised police force. You had your local police forces, and if they walked around and they would find you misbehaving, you would be taken to the parish lockup and maybe locked up overnight. Why was it there? Because at one time a magistrate was living in Cannon Hall. When the Metropolitan Police was founded, then they had another lockup, which can also be seen near to St Mary's Catholic Church, and there's a little sign on the wall there that says here was the watch house where the watch used to be, and they would lock people up there. At one time, the land would have been owned by the church, as was most of Hampstead. After the Reformation, you had lords of the manor, and there was a lord of the manor of Hampstead Heath at the end of the 19th century called Thomas Marion Wilson, and he wanted to build houses on the heath. And this is where the people of Hampstead showed their independence. It's a place that's neighbourly, people care about it, and they founded a Save the Heath committee. And Hampstead Heath, unusually, is bigger today than it was in the past. That's because they added to it. So not only did the local committee save the heath, but also in later years you had the Hampstead Heath extension, which was added to it in the early 1900s, and then in the 1920s we had some of the land around Ken Woodhouse. When that ceased to be residential, that was added to the heath, so it's even larger than it ever used to be.